Hello, this is Professor Gimpel, and welcome to a mini lecture on a brief introduction to lean process improvement. Lean process improvement is essentially inspired and based on the Toyota production system, which was pioneered by Toyota in the second half of the 20th century and has since become the basis for most manufacturing. Today we're going to cover a few basic topics. We're going to ask, what is lean process improvement? A key topic of lean process improvement is a focus on waste. And so we're going to talk briefly about what we mean by waste, and then we're going to introduce the 5 principles of lean. So what is lean to begin with? Lean is a focus on getting rid of waste, minimizing the amount of waste that happens in every process. So the key idea to lean is maximizing customer value while minimizing waste. Essentially, this means creating more values for your customer while requiring fewer resources to do it. A lean organization understands customer value. It is the focus and the passion that drives the company. And a company that follows a lean philosophy and lean process improvement techniques is going to focus on continually increasing that customer value. The ultimate goal, provide perfect value to the customer through perfect value creation processes that have zero waste. This is an aspirational goal that is not realistically achievable, but when you aspire to this, amazing things can happen. What is this waste that I've been talking about in the past few slides? Well, waste is anything other than the minimum amount of equipment, materials, parts, space, and workers' time that are absolutely necessary in order to add value to your product or service. So if you look at a process here of packing and shipping a product. In this example, you have an employee carry a box from somewhere else. It could be the storage room or a shelf, and this person carries it and then places it down in a small pile so that the next worker in the flow can then bend over, pick it up, put it on a small conveyor belt. When it reaches the end of the conveyor belt, it gets put into a pile. Then the boxer, the worker who is in charge of boxing the product, bends over, picks it up, and then puts it into the box that ultimately will be carried over, put into another pile, which will then be carried to the delivery truck. Now, the problem with this is not that there are 4 steps in this process. The problem is there is a lot of waste. There is a lot of time that is spent in moving these boxes across distances. So as each worker has to take a step, and as each worker has to bend over first to put the box down, and then the next person in the process has to bend over to pick it up, bend back up, and do the next step in the process, all of that is taking time and adding time to the process. And as we all should know by this point, time is money. A lean process improvement would eliminate the need for this excess movement by moving these steps physically closer together so that this person will still need to bring the box from the storage room or warehouse or wherever it's coming from. But once this part of the process flow begins, it is not an interrupted flow. This person will hand off the box to this person. It will go down a conveyor belt to the person who will put it in a box. That person turns around, takes it off the conveyor belt, immediately puts it in the box, and then hands that box off to this final person. There is far less movement, first in the transportation of the product, and secondly, even in the motion that the people have to do to complete their task. Right here, we still have bending over to put the product in a box, and perhaps this person needs to pick it back up. but we have gotten rid of all of this movement time. We have gotten rid of the time that the boxes will sit waiting for something to happen. This is wasted time. This is work in process inventory that is not making money for the company at present. We have eliminated that. The other thing we have done is eliminated the need for many people to bend over and either put stuff down or pick it up. That reduces the chance of injury to the people who are working. So our workers will be healthier in addition to being used much more efficiently. If you think about the old way we used to put out fires, rather than everybody go from the well or the big storage tank with water and just run and throw one bucket at a time, if we form a fire line where we can just hand the buckets of water, there is a constant flow of water to put out the fire. This is essentially what the lean process improvement idea attempts to do with our processes. This idea itself has been around for centuries. So there are 8 key categories of waste, and an easy mnemonic device for remembering it is to remember the term downtime. So essentially, what we look at when we think of waste categories, we think of defects. So a defective good is always wasteful. You either have to spend the time to redo it or you throw it away. When you throw something away that you spent the time and money to make, that is always wasteful. Overproduction of work in process. You should have the minimal amount of work in process to meet your demand. That is a key focus of lean, is to produce to the rate of demand so that you haven't halfway produced a lot of goods, spent the time, money, and investment, as well as have to find the storage space to store your work in process, only to have it not complete it because there's not demand for it. Waiting. Time is money. Waiting costs us money. There's often a lot of non-value added processing that takes place. A goal of lean process improvement is to identify what the customer values, what the customer wants, and provide that value to the customer. If you are adding features to your product, if you are providing an extra level of service that your customer isn't looking for and really doesn't care about, that's non-value added processing. If your customer only cares about 3 features and you're building 10 features into your product, that's 7 features too many that you're wasting your time and money creating because your customer won't be paying you for it because it doesn't matter to them. Transportation of materials and equipment is a huge waste. If you think about the auto manufacturing industry, there are parts that are currently shipped from Mexico to Detroit. But if you think about the Detroit factory that actually puts together your Ford Mustang or your Ram truck or your Chevy Silverado, many of the suppliers are right there in Detroit, and often they are simply down the street from the plant where the car is put together. There are some factories where the supplier will actually be co-located in the automaker's factory, even though it's a separate operation running separately. But that way, it simply has to go from one end of the factory floor to the other. It never even has to be transported on the street. It takes time and a lot of money to transport materials and equipment. You can run into traffic. You can also run into other logistics issues. The closer you are, the less likely you are to have those issues, and the more time you will save. In that example we gave of shipping out that product, we cut out a lot of the transportation time of simply moving the box from one part of the room to the other. That can dramatically increase the efficiency of a process. Inventory excesses. Ideally, A lean process should have just-in-time delivery of its inventory, in which your supplier is providing you with the inputs you need at exactly the rate you need them. So you are never storing inventory that you will use to make your products. You also want to make it so that you are following what is known as a pull strategy, in which you are making something once a customer orders it, so that you will never make more than your customers are buying from you, and you will never have inventory of your own products once they're done, because you are building them to order. Motion. Similar to transportation, if there are excess steps in a process, if there is excess motion, if you can do one turn of a large wrench instead of 2 turns of a small wrench, you have cut the amount of time it takes to complete that activity. Lean focuses on the optimal use of your employees. You do not want employees to be idle. You are paying people to work. You want them to be working. So you want to design a process that is going to optimize the use of your employees' time, so that they will not have a lot of downtime where they are waiting for something to happen. If there is a process where an employee is only needed at the beginning or end of a process, and that process takes all day, you may want to allocate that employee to more than one process, so that that employee's time and efforts are being fully used by your organization. There is a rule of thumb that only about 5% of everything a company does adds value to their product or service. Now keep in mind, when we're talking about adding value, the value is what your customer is willing to pay you for. So your process itself may have many inefficiencies. There are also things that you have to do as a nature of running a business that your customer doesn't directly care about. You have to pay your employees, which means that you have to run payroll. Whether you do it in-house or outsource it, you have to do payroll. Your customer, though, doesn't care about that. That doesn't actually add value to your customer, but it's something you need to do. What you want to do, if you have a lean operation, and when you take an approach of lean process improvement, you want to minimize all of those things that do not directly add value to your customer through the service you provide or through the product you produce. So if we want to look at examples of some of those wastes, think of watching a machine run. This could be in a traditional manufacturing setting where someone will put a piece of steel into a fabrication machine and will have to wait 1 or 2 minutes as the steel is either pressed or it is customized into a certain thing, and then after that minute or two, the employee can take it out. Well, that's a minute or two that the employee is watching the machine run and nothing is happening. In an office environment, this happens to us all the time, where we wait for a report to build. We watch the status update go from 0 to 100%, taking 30 seconds, a minute, 2 minutes. Before we can get our report, we're watching the computer run. We are simply watching that machine run. As statistical analysis becomes more important for our daily job, if we don't have the processing power on the machine that we are using, we wait while the numbers are crunched. Waiting for parts, if you need to wait for a part to arrive so you can continue the manufacturing process, that is waiting. There's often counting parts where there's a delivery and you need to make sure the appropriate number was delivered, and then you can start doing your job. That doesn't add any value. If there would be a way to automate that so that that time would either be eliminated or reduced, you have cut out that time where you are having to do something, but it is not adding value from the customer's point of view. If you make more things than you can sell, that's excess inventory. Moving parts over long distances, as we've previously discussed, that is a transportation waste. Storing work in process, this is classic overproduction. You have produced too many components and you have too many half-finished or partially finished products that you're not going to be able to sell because there's not demand. That's classic overproduction. If you are in a factory setting and you're looking for tools, that's excess motion. This doesn't mean you're scouring the whole factory floor for your tool. It is simply, instead of it being immediately up and to the left so you can just grab it and know where it is, you have to scan and see where it is. If that frequently happens, you're wasting a lot of time. This also happens a lot in an office environment, not so much looking for tools, but it could be looking for a specific file. Maybe a file on your hard drive where you're not sure exactly where you saved it, a physical file on your desk where you have to spend a few minutes finding that file so you can do your work. If you use a system like SharePoint, if it is not well organized and it is essentially the equivalent of everybody just barfing up their files onto a giant bucket on the server, you're going to spend a lot of time, first of all, finding the file that you need, and secondly, looking to make sure that that is the most recent version of the file. So looking for tools is not just in a factory setting. Machine breakdowns, well, few things are going to happen. You're going to have to wait for the machine to get back up and running, or it's going to be kicking out defects. Again, this is not only in manufacturing, but if your system goes down in an office environment, you have to wait for it to get back up and running. What is even worse than that often is there is an error in the system. Something has broken down and it is throwing off defects. Often you don't know about that for a while. And so you are going through having everything that's being done being defective, and you may not know for hours or weeks. And then you have to go back and do a lot of rework. So you're doing rework to correct these defects. Well, that doesn't add value. That's fixing a mistake. At the end of the day, the customer has demands. They want you to deliver something to their specifications. The fact that you had to rework it because it wasn't up to those standards the first time around, that's irrelevant to a customer. In their mind, you should have gotten that quality the first time around. Another common form of waste is redundant inspections. This is when you are having to make sure that something is done right multiple times. Ideally, you want to build in inspections to the entire process so there's no formal inspection. Every step of the way, someone's giving it a quick check, making sure that what has arrived into their hands is correct. And then the next person does it. And that way, every step of the way, there is a quick check, but you're not doing redundant inspections. Also, if at the end of the line or at periodic points along the line, you know there is a formal inspection process. People will say, I'm not going to spend my time and effort checking because it's someone else's job and they'll catch the error. That actually increases errors. Why do we focus on these 8 wastes? A key reason is when there is waste, that means there is time trapped in the process. We can reclaim that time. We can make our process more efficient by shortening the amount of time that's trapped, by freeing that time to either do something else to be more productive or to finish our process more quickly. And keep in mind, time is money. When we recognize waste, that helps us identify the root cause of a problem. When we see that there's rework needed, that means something's not being done right along the way. When we see that there is excess inventory being created, that means either our forecasting methods are not good, or we have a system where we could make it better by making it more a pull method where we are only replacing things or building when there is an order, when there is acknowledged demand from the customer. Every waste represents an underlying flaw in the way we've designed our process. And that's why we should focus on these 8 wastes. So let's go and talk about the 5 principles of lean. The 5 principles of lean are identify value, map the value stream, create flow, establish pull, and seek perfection. When we talk about identifying value, what we are talking about is identifying what matters to the customer. So when we add value to our product or our service, it's the activities in our process that increase the market form or function of the product or service. Basically, that translates to anything we do that improves our product or service in a way that the customer is willing to pay for it. If the customer is not willing to pay for it, it's not valuable to them, and we shouldn't be wasting our time doing it. We have lots of non-value adding activities in our processes. These are activities that don't add that market form, which is creating the product to make it more attractive to our customer, adding that functionality that matters to the customer, or something that the customer simply doesn't care about and they find unnecessary. We should do our best to eliminate these, simplify them, reduce them, or integrate them into something else so it's not taking extra time. The second principle of lean is to map the value stream. When we talk about mapping the value stream, what we're talking about is looking at the big picture. It is looking at all the activities and all the resources that are required to deliver our product or service to the customer. We take a big picture approach to the entire set of processes, not just one process. And we look at what are actually our value-adding activities and also the non-value add activities we have. Again, keeping in mind that the activities that add value to the customer are the ones that create something they're willing to pay for. There's lots of stuff. Processing payroll, all of our back office stuff that actually gets the job done, but the customer doesn't care about. Those are non-value adding activities. They may be necessary, and that's why we want to make sure we add them. And that's why we want to make sure we include them when we look at our value stream. But at the end of the day, we really need to focus on what is adding that value and figure out a way to reduce the amount of time and money that we're spending on these non-value adding activities. This is an example of mapping the value stream. This image is pulled from Wikipedia, and basically what this does is it shows the flow of activities from the beginning of the process until our product is delivered to the customer. What it also does is tell us how much time is taken in each step of the process. We also look at what happens between these different steps. So if we were to look at this, what we can see is between process A and B, we spend 4 days. Between process B and C, 1 day. Between process C and actually shipping it to the customer, we spend 3 days. So just these, between the processes, we are spending 8 days that do not add value to the customer. Also here, it appears that there is a 6-day lead before we actually start anything. So that means there's 2 weeks, 14 days that happen within our process that simply are not adding any value to the customer. We should do what we can do to reduce these because these are waste. When we talk about creating flow, what we are talking about is having a seamless flow of activities where we are not starting and stopping during our process. And so let's take an example using a BPMN diagram to better understand creating flow. When you're trying to create flow, if we have this example here, basically the process starts, a contract is created, and then on the hour, so even though the contract's created, it sits there until the clock strikes 1 o'clock, 2 o'clock, 3 o'clock. Then all the contracts are collated together and sent in a batch to the lawyer. And then the lawyer, we have to wait for one of the lawyers in the legal department to have free time to review that stack of contracts. The lawyer reviews the contracts, then approves them, but then waits until the close of business to send out the contracts. And then we are done with our process. Now, as we can see here, there are 3 times when our process flow is interrupted. We have to wait for it to reach a certain time. Then there is a condition that we need an attorney who can find time with everything else she has to do to review these contracts. And then after they're reviewed, the customer with whom the contract is written and executed has to wait until the end of business before we send them out the contract. Something that would have better flow would be simply if we could find a way to directly, we create the contract. That is adding value. That allows us to do business with the customer and provide the product or service that they need. And then if we could, rather than collating the contracts, send them directly to an attorney who is available, perhaps somebody whose job is specifically to review these contracts. So we create it, it gets reviewed, it gets approved and executed. And then as soon as it's executed, it gets distributed. So let's go to distribute contracts. And so essentially, rather than taking all day, regardless of what time we started in the morning, our customer is not going to have the executed contract back in their hands until after the close of business this day. So probably not until they get into their office the next morning. Here, as soon as our process starts, we create the contract, review it, approve it, and then send it back to the customer. This could take a few minutes or a few hours, but there are no delays in the middle. So we don't start and stop our process. There is a smooth flow. The 4th principle of Lean is to establish pull. Traditionally, factories and even service providers used a push system. This is when the different steps in the process would produce their product using forecasts or a predetermined schedule. And if you were manufacturing components that were to be put in a final product, you would just manufacture those components according to your schedule, whether or not there was actually demand for them to be put into that final product yet. A pull system reverses that, and basically it tries to match the flow of production with the actual demand. So if you are making a component that goes into a final product, you will make a component right before it is needed to be put into that final product. You will not create a surplus of the component that you are making because you will be making it as it's needed to be put into that final product. Toyota uses a term Kanban. Here is an example of a Kanban card. This is in a factory setting. When more of this part are needed, a card is created, it is scanned, and then the replacement parts are created and used to replace it so that it never runs out, but that there is never a big amount of inventory on hand. Essentially, this picture shows the Kanban cycle. A customer withdraws what it needs. So on an assembly line, if you need a 1-inch long screw, you take that 1-inch long screw from your bucket of screws, And that releases a signal that says, hey, I need another 1-inch screw here. And then that tells the supplier to make another screw. The supplier makes another screw and ships it to you, and it arrives just in time before you need a 1-inch screw to put into your next product. So let's take an example about using pull in the way we design a process using BPMN. So let's look at a pull system here. So here I have a BPMN model in which when the process starts, we make 3 separate components and we produce 100 of them. And once we have produced 100 of each component, then we bring them together and assemble them into 100 final products. Once we have 100 final products, we sell each of the 100 units, we deliver the sold units to the customer, then we check for unsold units, and if we have unsold units, we throw them away, and then we're done. If we don't have unsold units, we're done. The big problem with this model is there is a likelihood we are going to throw away things because we produced a batch of 100 before we sold any of them. And so this is a traditional push method in which we make things and then hope that they get used later. If we took this model and looked at it differently and instead structured it as a model based on a pull system or a pull process, we could get rid of the stage where we throw away the products that we spent the time and money making. So let's see what that might look like. So in this model, rather than starting and producing all 3 components, the first thing we would want to do is to have a sale. So let's push all of this over. And the first thing we're going to want to do is sell a final product or products. We could sell more than one. And then the next thing we would want to do, I can get rid of that from this stage of the process. So we would sell the final product before we actually made it. Then we would produce our different components that we need to make the final product. So we would produce component A, component B, and we'd produce component C, and I'm going to put a annotation here so that I'm saying produce the number of components equal to sales order size. And then I would assemble the final product or products, depending on how many were ordered. And then I would deliver them to the customer. I don't have to check for anything unsold, and I don't have to throw anything away because I actually sold them before I made them. And so not only did we make this process more efficient by eliminating several steps, we also got rid of any of the potential to have to throw things away, because rather than making stuff and then selling it, we do a pre-sale and we make to order. So we wait until someone buys something and then we manufacture it based on the number of final products they have ordered from us. This is an example of a pull process rather than a push process. There's always the question of why use pull? We can get more economies of scale if we use the traditional push method and just make a whole lot of stuff at one time. But pull is it's a simple and flexible method for balancing the flow of resources so that we are producing to the rate of demand, so that we are not producing more goods or providing more service than is being demanded by the customer, because that would be waste. This helps communicate customer demand throughout the entire operation, because if we wait until a customer places an order before making it, we know exactly what the demand for our product or service is going to be. It also allows us to be responsive to quality issues, because if the customer flags us with a problem, or anywhere in our process we identify that there is a problem, we have a lot less inventory on hand that we've already manufactured, so we can much more quickly correct the situation and introduce the new parts with the error having been corrected into our manufacturing process. Or if we're providing a service, we can quickly change wherever there's a problem in our service and have the rest of our service provided more smoothly. The fifth principle of Lean is to seek perfection. When we talk about seeking perfection, we're really talking about continuous improvement. When we talk about continuous improvement, we are talking about constantly finding large or small ways we can make incremental improvements to our process. This isn't about dramatically redesigning the process. It is about taking what we do and constantly figuring out ways we can eliminate a little bit of waste here, a little bit of waste there, constantly improve the quality a little bit. Now, this is something that is not just done by a business process analyst or a manager. This is something that has to be part of the organization-wide philosophy so that everybody is constantly looking for a way to improve the way they do their job to better create the value that the customer is looking for. It needs to be organization-wide, it needs to be part of the culture, or else it's really not going to be fully effective. At Toyota, for example, everybody who works on the assembly line has the opportunity to pitch an idea of how to do what they do a little bit better. A lot of the ideas that ultimately make it into Toyota's processes are introduced by people who are working in the line, who figure out a way that they can do their job a tiny bit better. Toyota rewards this. Their incentive structure is such so that if you come up with an idea that shaves a second or two off what you do and ultimately improves the quality or efficiency of the manufacturing process, they will give you a cash bonus for it. So this continuous improvement, the seeking perfection, has to be cultural, has to be organization-wide, and it's important that the incentives of the organization incentivize people to constantly search for and improve the way they do things. So today we've had a brief introduction to Lean. We talked about what Lean is, which is the constant and systematic way of identifying and reducing waste. We talked about waste as non-value adding activities. Value-adding activities are the activities that add value from the perspective of the customer, not our internal perspective. And we briefly talked about the 5 principles of Lean, which are identifying value, mapping the value stream, creating flow, establishing pull, and seeking perfection. I hope you have found this mini lecture informative, and I thank you for watching.